We're on Bill 273. Senator Chris Duenas, you're recognized.
Buenas tardes, señor Speaker. Malagadzu Tapega, Prinaponi, Estina Prinaponi, 273, Giminatres na Tinaitay. Za Malagadzu Loki ta diskuti Estina Prinaponi za Hugagaw supporti Loki gi Hatsagweku para Estina Prinaponi. Good afternoon, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the opportunity to request that Bill 273, as substituted by the Committee on Utilities, Transportation, Public Works, and Veteran Affairs, be accepted and moved down to the third reading for voting and discussing.
Hearing no objection.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. This is a very simple bill. Several years ago, our good friend, Speaker from Barrigada, introduced a piece of legislation that's similar to this, related to this same proposed road 7 that was part of the 1966 master plan, highway master plan at Public Works. Madam Speaker, this particular proposed road runs, or was supposed to run, basically off of Route 4 in Hagåtña, next to the Hagåtña Shopping Center, all the way up to I believe, eventually come out of the Totocañada Road. It was explained to me that in my discussions with Public Works that this project was ambitious and would have been very costly, and that's why I think that it was never actually started on or finalized or the like. The issue is, Madam Speaker, that in that master plan and with this proposed road, at the Department of Land Management, it is not, or landowners that this proposed road had run through are unable to consolidate their lots, do what they need to do to, divide their properties, or anything with their property within that particular border of this proposed road. There are several families, and in particular this family, who approached my office to ask that we consider this so that they can move on with having their children realize their dreams of building their home after they've been able to subdivide the property through the elimination of this proposed road, and in such case land management would be able to do so. And so, Madam Speaker, in the substitute version, we've also asked Public Works to, within 180 days, do an evaluation of the entire route so that other families in a similar situation may be also relieved of this proposed road. If that's the case, if Public Works is no longer, even going to consider this proposed road in the future or ever. So it just takes care of those two things, Madam Speaker. I feel for this family. They in the public hearing, the daughter had come and has pleaded with us on behalf of her family and other siblings that we please do this so that they could move on with their lives and realize their dream of home ownership, especially in the current market conditions with interest rates being very favorable. I just think it's the right thing to do, Madam Speaker. And so it's a very simple bill to simply delete this proposed road portion from this piece of property and to make this family whole. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to speak on Bill 273.
On the motion, recognizes Senator Tom Adams.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of the bill. I understand fully what this situation is like, because just last year, actually where I live in Manilo, the current Route 10 that we see right now was actually supposed to be built on the inside, which is currently a 2-lane road. And so what had happened was the government of Guam had actually reserved 20 feet of space to be able to expand the road that currently was initially projected to be Route 10. Well, in researching, when we were going to build a fence, we found that some of the neighbors had already come across the same situation, And so it was a matter of going to Department of Land Management, getting verification from DPW that in fact they're not going to build a 4-lane highway through this through the what is called as Old Price Road, and that the road that was intended to be built there is actually the existing Route 10. So it was an administrative matter where they simply acknowledged that that easement was no longer needed, and so they erased it, which then allowed the construction of a fence right on the property boundary where it was legally allowed. So certainly this has not taken away anything from DPW's planning for the highways, because again it was one of those situations where, you know, many years ago somebody sat down, a planner sat down and says this is where we want a 4-lane highway, and much later it got updated, but we did not go back to correct the books on it. Thank you.
On the motion, Bill 273. Yes, Speaker Maglinen, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of Bill 273. Once again, this is specific to a portion of the master plan which identified a road that was reserved traveling from by the Agana Swamp all the way up to Harvest, Mongmungto to Mighty Road. A few years ago, we did the same thing in terms of there was a property owner there in which that reservation of the easement basically dissected his property. It went right down 3/4 of a way on one side with a quarter of his other property on the other side of this 100-foot easement. And so, but it was reserved. It was never taken. It was never condemned. But it shows as a reserve, which meant that the property owner could not develop that 100 feet and always had to encumber his property showing that 100 feet reservation of an easement pursuant to the master plan. And what we did was at that time, the owner said, can we just delete that easement and I'll make sure that I provide an easement when I subdivide my property in one side of my property so it doesn't get divided in half by this reservation of an easement. So we did that, and then the owner was able to develop a small housing subdivision there. At that time, we also asked DPW in that bill that was passed originally to review the remaining reservation from there down to the Agana Swamp. And they were supposed to have come back to us and identified if they needed any of that reservation for future use of the property. Well, unfortunately, they never did that. So while we deleted a small portion to resolve the problem it presented for one landowner and asked DPW to resolve the others by reviewing them, they never did that. And so we find ourselves, I guess, in this bill one more time, that there's another property owner that wants to develop his property, but again, he has this property running down the middle of his property, and he can't use it, and he can't develop his property because he has to show that encumbrance of this reservation for an easement. And so this would, once again, based on DPW, that it is not needed. You should release that property, let the landowner have it and develop it, and provide his own easements if he subdivides within his property. And then once again, I guess we're asking them to review the remaining portion of that delineation of reservation for the road, so that we can resolve once and for all the property dilemma that is presented by showing a reservation of an easement for something that we know is not going to be built. I think that it reflected in the other plans that they're not, but it's still showing in the DPW and land management maps as being reserved, and it still encumbers and prevents landowners from maximizing their property. So that is some of the history that preceded the need to continue to work with DPW on resolving the matters presented to landowners there with the showing of that reservation for that easement. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
welcome, Senator. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on the motion? Can we take a brief recess? Senator Dueñas, you're recognized.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, in order to have members of the body view a full-scale map on this deletion, I request that we take set aside Bill 273 while I obtain that map for the viewing of the body. Oh, that doesn't sound right. For the
That motion then without
yeah.
any objections.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
So ordered. Thank you very much, Senator Dueñas. Senator Ada, I understand you have a motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Notwithstanding the House rules, I'd like to, we can go back to motions.
On that motion without any objections, so ordered.
I'd like to move to exchange the positioning of Bill 336, which is currently in position number 30, and move it up to position number 21 in place of 279.
On
And-
that motion without any objections, so ordered. Thank you very much, Senator. Senator Munya Barnes, we are in motions. You just moved for 235.
Si Jos Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, if I may, at this time, I'd like to also move that substituted Bill 235 be put on the second reading,
At the bottom of the...
at the bottom of the second reading.
So it's substitute bill number 235.
Yes. Si Jos
It was
Masi.
inadvertently left out. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. So on that motion without any objections, so ordered. Can you also just make a motion to go back to... Okay, we're in second reading. Okay, to go back to second.
Okay, so Madam Speaker, then I move that we go back to the second reading.
On that motion without any objection, so ordered. So Senator Ada, you are recognized then for substitute bill number 336-31.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to move that Bill 336-31, as substituted by the Committee on Youth, Cultural Affairs, Procurement, General Government Operations, and Public Broadcasting, be moved to the third reading file, and I'd like to discuss it.
Yes, Senator, you may proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the objective of Bill 336 is to authorize the port really basically two things. One is to authorize the port to explore the option of purchasing the Pola gantry cranes from its current owners, Matson and Horizon, to begin that exploration. And the second objective of Bill 336 is then, after the exploration of this particular option, to then enter into direct negotiations with the owners, Matson Horizon, to purchase a crane or cranes. If the exploratory findings suggest that a negotiated direct purchase of a crane or cranes would be in the interest of the port and the customers that it serves. Now, to the question of why entertain the direct purchase option. First of all, the port's capital improvement requirements exceeds its financial capacity. We know that in Phase 1A alone, it has a requirement for at least $54 million. That's just for the capital improvements for infrastructure. Above that, there's also the requirements for the purchase of, by law, at least 2 new or used cranes. And so the port's ability to borrow is really is driven by the projected cargo flow, and also by the goal of minimizing tariff increases. Now, the dilemma that the port is in right now is that because of the state of limbo that the military buildup is in, it's really kind of difficult to project the cargo flow that will be resulting from the military buildup. And so then just the cargo flow really from the organic demand is barely sufficient to be able to go out and borrow the sums of money that are needed. The second reason why I would suggest that we would want to entertain the direct purchase option is that the purchase of the cranes may be a reasonable interim measure given our limited financial resources. For example, it's a choice between can we afford to go out and buy a brand new crane that is probably going to cost about $9 million per crane versus, say, possibly $4 million for a used but certified crane that presumably may have a remaining lifespan of 20 years. The second reason why we may want to entertain the direct purchase option is that simply because the cranes are on site. And under the current license agreement that allows those cranes to operate on the port's waterfront, that license will be in place for another 3 years before it expires. And so, all things being equal, it seems like it would be a good business decision for the port to acquire the cranes and begin building equity with the surcharges that are currently being charged to Guam's consignees, which are then ultimately passed on to Guam's consumers. Secondly, it would be best for the port to take ownership of the cranes at the earliest possible opportunity. One, the Pola cranes play a critical role in the port operations, and that control really should rest with the port. The port should be the one to decide which ships will be serviced by which gantry crane or whatever. But right now, with the Pola cranes, Matson basically says those are our cranes, and it will be used to service our ships. And that's it. Secondly, if the port was to take ownership of these cranes now, it really would enable it then to retire the older gantry cranes, which are older and smaller gantry cranes, which are expensive to operate and maintain. And finally, by retiring those older cranes, then the avoided maintenance costs of the older cranes can be used to service the debt that is used to purchase the Pola cranes. I would just like to briefly go into the bill and just kind of really just point out what I think are the highlights to it. One, of course, is very noticeable is it amends Public Law 30-100, which essentially says Port Authority, no later than December 31, 2012, you shall acquire through pursuant to the Guam procurement law and not through the use of a task order to any existing contract, you will go out and procure new or used cranes. What Bill 336 now is saying that the Guam procurement laws prohibiting direct negotiation and acquisition or inconsistent with succeeding authorities are hereby waived. In other words, we're saying we don't have to go through the bidding process. Go ahead and explore this option of negotiating directly with the owners. The second part of the bill is it sets up the structure of how will this negotiation actually take place. So the first requirement is, of course, the board of directors will appoint a negotiating team that will be authorized to engage in negotiations with the carriers. However, there's a provision there on page 4 called the conflicts prohibited. And this was I would term this as the Guthart's provision, conflicts prohibition provision, which basically talks about that certain persons will not be eligible to participate in this negotiating team if they are, for example, elected officials, they are advisors, consultants, or employees who are or had previously been employed by the carriers. Third, a person who might stand to personally benefit from the negotiated terms would not be allowed to sit on this negotiating team. So let's say, for example, this individual has a gantry crane maintenance company. He will not be allowed to sit on there because potentially that individual would stand to benefit from the negotiated terms. And then, of course, item 4, there's the spouse or person, and the consanguinity limitations and all that are outlined there in the prohibitions. Now, the bill requires that prior to the initiation of negotiations, prior to that negotiating team sitting down at the table to negotiate with Matson and Horizon to negotiate a fair and reasonable price, the port must hire an independent crane expert, of which they already have. And they have already actually started with the assessment. Now, this is not because this bill was introduced. It was because the USDA actually wanted them to assess this if, in fact, this might be a candidate. Exactly which came first, I'm really not sure. The fact is that through a task order, a crane expert has been hired to begin the assessment of the cranes, and it is expected that that assessment will be completed sometime in December. And what that assessment will do is that it will basically take a look at the crane and in its as-is condition and determine what's it going to take to bring that crane up to the standard where it should be according to industry requirements. It may be that it may take $1 million. And so, of course, that lowers then the purchase price of the cranes. The other thing is that it would have to provide, the crane expert would have to provide an assessment of the material condition and life expectancy. Now, through technical assessments such as non-destructive testing, the crane experts will be able to actually determine if there is an inordinate amount of corrosion on the metal structure of the cranes, such that maybe, this crane, with the deterioration that's on it, will probably only have a service life of 5 years. It may be that the condition of it is such that reasonably it could last for another 20 years. And that, of course, is with proper maintenance. And then finally, the crane expert is to then take in all these factors into account. Is supposed to determine a range of fair and reasonable value of the polar cranes. So exactly what factors he will take in, I don't really know. But what he's going to be required to come up with is what's really a fair and reasonable value of these cranes today. Supposedly, Matson and Horizon paid approximately $6 million each for these cranes to get them refurbished, to get them shipped to Guam and installed. Here we are 2 years later. Is it still worth $6 million each? Probably not. I'm sure it'll probably be worth less. But what is that value? And that's what the crane expert is going to come up with. Now, the port is going to have to provide to the governor and the speaker of the legislature a copy of the assessment report within 5 working days upon completion. Now, so that information is going to have to come down to the legislature, and we'll have an opportunity to review it. If in the event that the outcome of the negotiation is for a lease to own, then the provision here on page 6, item E, is that the lease will be based on commercially reasonable terms and structured as a capital lease versus an operating lease. And what that means is that if we then agree that we're going to lease it, it's going to be a lease to own. So whatever I pay you annually, that's going to be basically I'm paying off what we've agreed on, and at the end of that term, ownership of that crane will then come to the port. Now, the decision to purchase these cranes will not rest solely with the negotiating team. If the negotiating team then reaches a point where they feel that they have reached the best terms possible with Matson, then they have to take these terms back to the board of directors, where the board of directors will then review it and do one of two things. If it agrees with the terms, then it should ratify it, and at that time then it gets transmitted to the Public Utilities Commission. If it does not agree with the terms, then that's it. That's the end of that ball game. No more discussions, no more negotiations, and the port's got to be ready to begin initiating procurement procedures pursuant to Guam's procurement laws. In other words, then we go back, we go out to the open market and bid for new or used cranes. Now, if the board chooses to ratify the negotiated terms, it goes to the Public Utility Commission. Public Utilities Commission has their own port consultants who would then take a look at the negotiated terms and really determine if the negotiated terms are fair and reasonable, and the PUC will then give its disposition of whether absolutely these are good terms, reasonable terms, or whether the negotiated terms really is not in the best interest of the port. So there's those two checks and balances. It goes to the board first, and if it passes muster there, then it has to go to the Public Utilities Commission. Then on page 6, item G, it's required that, after it's gone through this gauntlet and the Public Utilities Commission finally has completed its review and has given its disposition of what to do, then the terms of the acquisition must be publicly disclosed. Everybody would then know how much we purchased the crane for and what are the conditions. Now there is, of course, in the offer letter, Matson threw out a figure, we'll sell it to you for $14 million. Well, I'll tell you right now, $14 million is not a fair and reasonable value, at least not in my mind. And so, that's why we have a crane expert to take a look at this to make that recommendation of what would be fair and reasonable. But the other requirement that they had in there was that the port will have to purchase maintenance services from Matson and Horizon. And for that reason, then, I don't think that that's acceptable. And so for that reason, on page 6, item H there, provision H, maintenance, that provision was put in there where basically the port will go out and through your conventional procurement laws will go out and procure the services of a performance management contractor who will manage the performance, the operation, and the maintenance of these newly acquired gantry cranes. Now, the feature of this performance management contractor is, of course, it's being used by the utilities now. For example, down at the power plants, they have a performance management contractor who has access to a pool of expertise, so that when a problem is being experienced and it cannot be resolved locally, then the PMC can actually reach back to this pool of experts and say, we're having this particular problem, we need somebody to come out here and troubleshoot it and repair it. The PMC will also have a supply chain that will be able to get the repair parts that you really normally do not find on the store shelves. So that would be one of the benefits of the hiring the services of a performance management contractor. But in hiring the performance management contractor, we want to make sure that the current employees that are being employed in the Port Equipment Maintenance Division are not to be displaced, but instead, as is done with GPA, Guam Waterworks, those employees will actually continue to do the work under the oversight of the performance management contractor, and they will continue to do the work. The performance management contractor provides them with the necessary parts and materials that are needed, the training, and whatever other technical expertise may be needed. And so that, Madam Speaker, is actually pretty much the feature of Bill 336. I do have some amendments to make. I guess I can make it now, and they're really simple technical amendments, if I may.
I'll go ahead and entertain that now, Senator Atta.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On page 4, line 17, it says there on line 17, it says, acquiring through purchase or lease to own at least, but not limited to, 2 of the Pola gantry cranes. Well, I want to change that because that language assumes that there will be at least 2 cranes that are worthwhile to buy. And at this point, that's an assumption. So I would rather than that we change that to say acquiring through purchase or lease to own 1 or more of the Pola gantry cranes. So if out of the 3 there's only 1 that's worthwhile entertaining, then it doesn't really limit them to have to go out and, negotiate for 2 cranes. So that, Madam Speaker, is the first amendment. We would then delete the words on line 17, at least, but not limited to, comma.
I'm looking at the as substituted version
Yes,
on page 4.
correct.
I have it on line.
Mine is on line
15.
17. Section 5, Section 3, it starts there on line 14. Section 3, add a new Section 5 to Public Law 30-57 as follows.
Yeah, I know. It's just that my lines are wrong. Clerk, can I just... Are you looking at the as substituted version right here? Right? Page 4? Section 3? I know, but look at this. Hold on, let me get a right copy because this is not right. Clerk, can I have a copy, please? I'm looking at the same version, but the lines are different. I just want to make sure.
Well, I just looked here on my colleague's desk next to me in his second reading file, and that's the same thing.
On
Page 4, line 17. 336? Correct. 336 as substituted by the committee.
You know what? I'm going to take a 1-second recess. We're going to delete on line 17. If you can repeat that, Senator Atta.
The words at least, but not limited to, comma, 2 And then on line 18 there, in parentheses, the number 2.
2. Does everybody have that?
And in place, put in 1 or more.
Does everybody follow? On the motion, does anyone care to speak? If not, are there any objections? No objections. Motion carries. Senator Atta, you still have the floor for amendments.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Again, another simple amendment on page 6, line 18, under public disclosure. It
Line
simply
16.
just clarifies that the terms of acquisition are publicly disclosed and backed by full disclosure of all relevant documents after the negotiations and PUC review and disposition have been completed. So it wasn't clear. It just says after negotiations and PUC have been completed. It really should read PUC review
Okay.
and disposition.
So on line 18, page 6, after the word PUC and PUC review and disposition have been completed.
Correct.
Everybody have that? Are there anyone wishing to speak on the motion? If not, are there any objections? No objections. Motion carries. Senator Atta, you still have the floor.
Well, Madam Speaker, I'll make the closing remarks, and I would just listen now to whatever other comments my colleagues may have. Thank you.
Si Masi, Senator Atta. I'll now recognize my brother, Senator Frank Blas. You're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I want to thank the sponsor of the bill and for allowing me the opportunity to be able to co-sponsor this piece of legislation as well. And let me explain it as far as my reasoning for co-sponsoring this. Madam Speaker, I do recall the conversations and the discussions that this body participated and had in with regards to the necessity for the cranes and to get cranes for our port, because at the time that we were having the discussions, I think we were down to, at one point in time there was a discussion we were down to just half a crane. But that and so. Where there was this whole, I guess, proposal and offer at that point in time for some new cranes or for some additional cranes to be brought in. But there was also the whole discussion too with regards to not only whether or not the cranes were going to fit, but how the cranes can be utilized. And I do recall back then too, I had some concern with regards to, wait a minute, you want to put cranes on the facilities, on the grounds. You're going to charge a per can fee on these, on the utilization of these cranes to take cans off of your boats. And then if we wanted to use those cranes, we couldn't just use those cranes to take the cans off other boats. We'd have to have discussions and negotiations and talk about how to be able to do this. And then there were other bells and whistles and things that we had to take care of in order for those cranes to be utilized. But I think the fact of the matter was that we all knew, at that point in time, and to no fault of anybody, one of the major discussions we're having there is are we going to have the capacity and the capability at that point in time or in the future to be able to get ready for this fast-moving train called the military buildup. And so, back then, those were our concerns. Well, today, obviously, some of those things have changed significantly. To the point where now, and for maybe for good cause, and it was a good thing that okay, we got the foot off the pedal for a little bit, and let's start to look at what we got and what we're going to need and how we're going to be able to spend. More importantly, how are we going to be able to afford things? All the while, we're going to have to take care and look at what we need for our organic growth. And throughout those discussions, and one of those things when we were talking about the polo cranes is again, we recognize why these cranes, they brought the cranes in, is to help so that they can make sure that they can, they can swiftly and, take the cans off of their ships. And to prepare for the buildup. Well, the buildup is not coming as quickly as people thought it was going to come. And now, whereas I remember the discussion back then was wanting to make sure that they recouped it as far as the investment and how much this thing was going to save us. Now today the discussion is how much this is going to cost us. And what has it cost? How much has it cost us while it was there? But so I think that, Madam Speaker, as part of the negotiations, I think it is prudent upon us and is necessary for us to be able to include as part of the assessment and of whether or not we should buy these cranes is look at how much we invested, how much we've already invested in these cranes, how much we put in these cranes. I have to agree with the author and the previous speaker with regards to, I think the cost was about $6 million per crane, if I'm not mistaken. Okay? And then they want us to pay for the same price that they had the cranes come in? I think a little bit more. Well, I firmly believe that we also should look at how much we've invested in these things and how much we've paid for the utilization of these cranes through the container handling surcharge that we've had to place on these cans. It's $125 a can. And so I think that it is prudent for us to be able to put as part of the assessment of this whole process of whether or not we should get these cranes, by also looking at how much we've invested already. And so with that, Madam Chair, I propose an amendment, and you've got the amendment, and all my colleagues have the amendments on their desk as well, is found on page 5. Okay. Actually, it starts assessment, line 14, but then more importantly, is going down to line 22, where line 22 starts subsection 3, determine a range of fair and reasonable value of the polo cranes. I want to add the words, said value shall duly consider owner's recouped investment in the polar gantry cranes through the container handling surcharge that was implemented by the owners of the cranes at the start of operations of the polar gantry cranes at the port and continues to be implemented. This way, ma'am, as we do the assessment, we also look at how much we've invested ourselves in this. Okay, I think it will only make sense. Anytime if you're going to buy the used car from your brother-in-law, but over the last few years, you've been paying for the gas, you've been paying for the oil change, you've been paying for the new tires that are on it. That should be considered too as well, in as far as the cost that your brother-in-law is going to sell you the car. So with that, here, our friend wants to sell us a used crane that we've put money into it. So I'd like for that investment that we put in to be considered as well. So that's my amendment to it.
Thank you, my brother, Senator Blas. He has an amendment. On the amendment, I know that the Vice Speaker wanted to speak, but I saw Speaker Wampat. Did you want to speak on Frank Blas's amendment? I have Speaker Wampat, Speaker Pangilinan, and Vice Speaker Cruz.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I think I understand, what the amendment, but and it makes sense, of course. But then the other thing is that in factoring in, I guess, how much has been invested already, and we want to be able to recoup our investment, but it doesn't say anything in terms of whether that should, and I don't know whether it should be here or should be negotiated by whomever the negotiators are, that they factor in then a reduction in terms of the purchasing price based on all of the investments that they've put into these gantry cranes. So my question is that, am I reading that correctly? And I'm asking the mover of the amendment to see if I'm on the right track, and if that's something that he's considered as well, whether it might be to further amend this to actually consider that in the purchasing price.
Yeah.
The author of the amendment to go ahead and yield to the inquiry. Would you
Thank
do
you, Madam
that,
Chair.
Senator Blas?
And yes, that is actually the intent here, is that while we're looking at this and we're making the assessments, and we have to consider the amounts that we've put into this, okay, and then factoring those amounts that we put into that, what that cost should be or what that price should be that we should pay. But that's why I said it's an assessment.
Senator Blas and Speaker Wampat, I have a point of inquiry. Senator Guthrie, state your point of inquiry, please. That's you said a point of information. A point of inquiry. State your inquiry.
Okay. Madam Speaker, is it not possible that instead of us having to pay for this, that they can donate it to the government of Guam in exchange for a tax benefit? I mean, they've made millions and millions and millions of dollars here. Why can't they just write it off and donate it to the people of Guam to show good faith, since they're sort of abandoning us? We're being seduced and abandoned again. Everybody seduces and abandons us.
Senator Guthrie, I will go ahead and ask
I don't know if that's my question to answer.
Maybe the author of the bill can answer it.
Senator Ada, would you like to yield to that point of inquiry?
Well, I mean, if the owners want to do that, I mean, that certainly should be on the table for negotiations. But, well, then if you come up with the language, I guess we could put that in that
Okay.
Transfer a dollar.
If there's going to be an amendment put in, Senator Guthrie, I will go ahead and still entertain the motion. We had Speaker Wampat on the floor. Speaker Wampat, you still have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And I know I've spoken to the author, and I was just trying to see where then that somehow that could be factored into the purchasing price. It doesn't say what it is. It just say that it be factored into it. Although I know there is this as-is valuation assessment, but nowhere else does it actually say that at all. This at least provides some, parameters in terms of, the cost, because now it says we want to try to recoup some of the investments that we've put in already, because it was beneficial to both or three of them, whoever it is. And but ultimately now, since the port is looking at either with a long-term lease to eventually own, or just to do an outright purchase, and then normally you would consider some of those investments that was put in by the port, and I leave that up to the mover of the amendment to probably figure out a way to put that in his amendment.
Thank you, Speaker Wampat. I understand, Senator Guthrie, I do have you under after the Vice Speaker, so I'll go ahead and entertain Speaker Pangilinan. Right now, you're recognized on Senator Frank Blas's amendment.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we go back to when this arrangement was being worked out and why Matson and Horizon decided to go get the cranes, that the port cranes were dilapidated, they were unreliable supposedly, and that they were doing this not for their own benefit, but for the benefit of the community, and that they were going to finance these cranes, and they did. They refurbished them, and they did. They transported them out to Guam, and they did. And they're going to put them in service at the port to be available to the people of Guam, and they did not. When they put the cranes in, the idea was it was going to assist the Port Authority and assist the people of Guam. But as soon as they put the crane in, they said, we're only going to use them for our own customers. And we said, oh, wait a minute, that wasn't the agreement. Oh, yes, here's the agreement. So, since the beginning, these companies, and we appreciate what they did, but they did it for their own interests. Don't let us be fooled that they did it for us. And they had every right to do that, and we worked with them so that they were able to do that, and they got the better part of the deal. Because as soon as they brought them in, they put in the surcharge. They said, by the way, we can't afford to do this. We're gonna now charge everyone that uses the crane. You know, the mover of the amendment said, do we have to consider this? Because it's like, your brother that you got that used car for, and you put in the tires, you change the oil and so forth. But while you were paying for that, he was the only one that could drive it. And every time that you borrowed his car, he charged you, even though you paid for the tire and the gas and everything else. I mean, what a sweetheart deal. And then now we're going to put them in a greater position of negotiations by saying, nobody else, we cannot consider buying any cranes from anybody else except you guys, because you've been such good people. That's the one element here that I have of a concern with the bill. And this kind of assuages that a little bit. It is correct. If they're going to charge us $5, $6, $10 million for these cranes, then it's not a good deal. Because we've paid for it and we're going to pay for it again. It's because of how it started out and how it's ending that I think leaves a little bit of a distaste in my mouth for moving forward in this direction of giving them the first access to our money once more, because we can only buy cranes from them first. And this, at least, I don't know, maybe they'll be ashamed, and that this will be there and they'll say, oh man, maybe we should make it right. Because you know what? We've made back all our money and a little bit more. Believe me, they didn't just break even on this one. They made money on this one. And then, so maybe by saying, hey guys, remember the original agreement? How this was going to benefit everyone? Maybe this is the way you can do it. Maybe you can look at, when we figure out what the depreciated cost of that after and then of course you retained all your investments, you've paid for it, operations, maintenance, and everything else, then even though there's economic value still remaining on those cranes, do you want to fleece the people of Guam one more time? Or are you going to be reasonable and a good citizen that you said you were when we leased you the rails at $20,000 a month while you're making $4 million a year? What a deal! That was their comeback. Oh, but we're paying the port for the use of the rail. Yeah, at a reduced rate. So while the port's making 220 a year, you're making 4 million. I don't know what's going to be the result of putting this in, but maybe I'll just call this the give you another chance to do what's right amendment, and I'm going to support it. Thank you.
When Puvetsu, Speaker Pangilinan, and I, Vice Speaker Cruz. Next.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Unfortunately, I cannot rise and be as charitable as the last speaker. As many of you know, if you want to raise my hackles, just discuss the cranes at the port. When I first came to this legislature 6 years ago, I was told that we needed cranes, and when I was in Los Angeles, my sister told me that the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach had cranes that they were accessing, and we could get it for $1. Speaker Mpinko and I went to the board meeting and made the presentation to them. As I understand it from within the port, they did travel to the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles. But as I understand it, the day that they were supposed to meet with the Port of Los Angeles and the Port of Long Beach, the board members were missing, but the members of Matson and Horizon were there, and they closed the deal. We have since had to pay over $10 million, or close to $10 million in port fees, additional port fees, because of that screw-up. In an attempt to try to take care of this, the sponsor and co-sponsor of this piece of legislation were in reverse order in the sponsorship of a bill that we passed in the last legislature, mandating, let me read the, mandating the purchase of these cranes by next month. I mean, 2012, I'm sorry. December of next year. I've looked at the master plan for 2007, and I just don't understand what we're doing, Madam Speaker. When we dealt with Public Law 30-100, there were 3 nay votes, myself, Speaker Pangilinan, and Speaker Wanpat. And I keep trying to figure out why, after 19, maybe by this time it's over $20 million in payments to PB for their consulting, we keep changing what we're doing. I looked at the recommendations of the master plan of 2007, and in section 6 it has the recommendations. 6.1 is cargo terminal modernization. 6.1.1 is terminal land area. 6.1.2 berth modernization, which we're now changing in another resolution that we're discussing today. Then 6.14, after the cranes, I mean the modernization of the berths, is the ship-to-shore container cranes that were being discussed. I mean, I don't understand why we're going to buy cranes that were accessed at $1, refurbished, and now we're going to be purchasing them for God knows how much money. I cannot support this, Madam Speaker, and I'm not going to be charitable enough to rise and say, I'm going to support it because I'm going to give them one more chance. We've been with the port's modernization for 5 years now. Speaker Mpinka was still alive. Then we changed the chairmanship to Minority Legal Counsel. The legislation in 3100, if everybody would just stop and read it, was very clear about what they're supposed to do. We've now changed everything around. And we keep giving them another chance, honey, because we like you. They've gotten completely out of control. They've spent over $20 million in consulting fees, and there hasn't been a spade put in the ground. Thankfully, the buildup isn't going on as scheduled, because otherwise we would have choked to death in that choke point. The port has to be kept to the plan that they've gotten approved by this legislature, by the legislation we approved with this legislature, mandating them to order, not under a task order, but to go and following the procurement law, to purchase brand new cranes and not waste any money, more money, on these ancient cranes, refurbished though they might be. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I object to this piece of legislation, and I will not support it.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. I just want to note for the record, though, that we're still on Senator Frank Blas's amendment, and I'll go ahead and recognize Judy Guthertz. We're on the amendment still, okay? Frank Blas's amendment. We're not on the main motion. You know what, Senator Guthertz, I'll go ahead and, yes. We'll go ahead and take a 1-minute recess.
Senator Blas?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity for that recess and to incorporate again similar concerns that I had with Madam Speaker with regards to what should be factored and what should be assessed and what should be deducted from the cost of the value of these cranes. Is we're going to use the amendment that I had initially proffered. I pulled back, but I wanted to basically use that as the template for the amendment that I'm going to proffer now in the interest of saving trees. Is basically now the amendment is to read, and it's going to be in the same place. Right after determine the range of fair and reasonable value of the polo cranes, it's going to read the owner's recouped investment in the polo gantry crane through the container handling surcharge that was implemented by the owners of the cranes at the start of the operations of the polo gantry cranes at the port and continues to be implemented shall be factored and deducted from the value. So what we're basically doing is striking out on my amendment the said value shall duly consider, taking that out and starting with the owners, and then shall be factored and deducted from the value at the end. And I got it here, so. And basically what it will do is it also hopefully address, again, similar concerns that I had, the concern that the gentlewoman from Malolo had brought up with regards to making sure that that was actually not only factored but deducted from the total cost, from the price that is going to be negotiated.
Is the Blas amendment clear to everybody? Any senator wish to be heard on the Blas amendment as proffered? Anything else, Senator Blas?
No, sir. Thank you.
Senator Guthrie's.
Clarifying that we're on the bill, not the resolution. And I'd like to request, Mr. Speaker, the assistance of legal counsel to put this wherever it should be. Because I'm not sure where it should be, but this is what I wanted to say. The people of Guam have compensated Horizon Lines with over $10 million since 2000. Is it 5? What's the date? Whatever the date is when we started this, okay? For use of the cranes via the payment of user fees, and that Horizon Lines has financially benefited from this arrangement throughout this period through the imposition of user fees. The legislature hereby calls upon Horizon Lines to be a good community partner and to donate the cranes to the people of Guam via the Port Authority of Guam in lieu of any additional payment in recognition of the appreciated value of the cranes and the fact that the people of Guam have more than paid for the use of the cranes since the contractual arrangement began. And that is what I'd like to offer wherever it should be placed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any senator wish to be heard on the Guthrie's amendment? Senator Ada.
I rise in objection to this. We seem to forget that the owners of the crane did invest approximately $18 million to get these cranes refurbished, get them brought to Guam and installed. And it's only reasonable that the owners be allowed to recoup on that investment. And the way that they did that was that they assessed a $125 surcharge on each filled container that was either offloaded or onloaded using the cranes. Now we do know that according to the port's data, that they've, over the past 2.5 years, I believe, they have recouped, or at least they have assessed about in the order of about $10 million from the offloading of containers. So that means then that, you know, there's a residual gross value, at least of what was invested, of about $8 million. I don't know how you would factor in there the cost of maintenance of those cranes and whatnot. But, you know, to make the categorical statement that the people of Guam has paid over and over for these cranes, I just, you know, I don't know what the basis is for that. And then to say that therefore they should donate the cranes to Guam, why don't we just put in there then an amendment to condemn the cranes and say we're going in to take it? I mean, that's essentially what we're saying, but we're putting it in a more nice way. And I just, you know, I just doesn't make sense. I think that we've hired some technical experts to look at this crane, assess it. If it is a good purchase, then let's sit down and be reasonable about it and negotiate a price so that we can take control of those cranes as soon as we can and start building our own equity into those cranes. But to go in there and say, you know, you should be good partners and just give us that, I don't care how much you're going to stand to lose, well, you know, that's just not reasonable. And so I really object to this amendment. And so that's my position on it.
Thank you very much. Any other senator wish to be heard on the Guthridge amendment? Senator Pangilinan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I guess then I'm a little unclear on the bill because my understanding of this is that the contract between Horizon and Matson and the Port Authority is for a 5-year period. That's how they assess the container surcharge, that they will recoup the cost of maintenance, the cost of financing, the cost of transportation, and the cost of setting up these cranes over that 5-year period. So I kind of was assuming that Matson's not going to give that up, that they would not sell it until the expiration of that 5-year. And at the expiration of that 5 years, they would have recouped all their costs associated with setting up these cranes and bringing them out here, plus their capital cost. So they would not be out of any pocket. Now, if we buy them before the end of the 5-year agreement for the use of those rails, then of course they would have, you know, to be paid for the remaining term of that 5-year agreement of what they would have charged to recoup their investments and their costs. So, with this regard, again, it's just, you know, it's kind of, it's that what did we start out with, and what are we going to end up with? And I think that, you know, just let's ask. After they've made all their money, after they have recouped all of their investments, after they have even saved themselves some money because we've got these cranes that were a little bit more efficient, so they paid less wharfage maybe, or less port fees because they were able to get out of port faster. Because of they made those investments, they, you know, there were some efficiencies that were built in that ensured that they were not going to lose money on this deal. So I don't foresee that, you know, that they would be in a position where they're going to say, oh no, we're going to cut the deal short for, you know, in 3 years or a year left and never mind that recruitment. I don't believe that they would do that. Just because of the way they've operated since the very beginning, that they were not going to do this at all if it was going to cost them any money whatsoever, and that they were going to make their money. Just take a look at the fuel surcharge. I mean, if you track other shippers, they didn't incorporate fuel surcharge when the price of fuel rose. I mean, but they were very readily able to do that to make sure that they didn't lose any money. So I understand the concern by the retiring speaker, and I agree with him to that extent that, you know, This was a 5-year deal, and at the end of 5 years, everybody was going to be whole. And the cranes were going to be paid for with Matson and Horizon not losing any money, and I know making some money in the end. And what then is the value of those cranes? Sure, they will have an economic value. And are they going to meet the original intent of the agreement, was to assist the Port Authority in bringing on these cranes? They probably did it because they could put in that future, the container surcharge. And the port, if the port was the one to do that in order to buy the crane, Matson and Horizon and those guys would have yelled. And our community would have yelled. But as long as it's like, you know, the good boy club of all the private sector, I can raise my price because, you know why? Because I can raise my price. But the port shouldn't be able to raise its price at all to meet its operational requirements, because that's going to increase my cost. And so I see some of those elements playing into this, but this will be you know, given the original, the amendment that just passed, this is pretty mild with regards to what would happen to what the final price would become. But it still, I believe, would recognize what Matson and Horizon have spent out of their coffers to put in those cranes. But they have recouped, they will, at the end of that 5-year period, I'm positive, would have recouped all of their costs and more. And it would then have been the people of Guam have paid for the cranes. Thank you.
Senator Palacios.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of Bill 336. It is my understanding that this bill only proposes to authorize for a direct negotiation between the port, of course, and the owners of the gantry crane for either lease to own or direct purchases.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I mean,
We're on an amendment at the present time.
thank you.
On the Guthert's amendment.
Then I'll come back later.
Thank you. Anyone else on the Guthert's amendment? Anyone else on the Guthert's amendment? There's been an objection. All those in favor of the Guthert's amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion fails. Any further amendments? Senator Palacios, you're recognized on the main motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of Bill 336, as I stated before. This only proposes to authorize, of course, the port to enter into direct negotiation with the owners of the gantry crane. There are some safeguards here, Mr. Speaker, and this does not mean that there will really be a purchase. There is, for example, the establishment of a negotiating team by the board of directors, and this team, of course, will begin the negotiation. There's some provisions here that would, I guess, prevent conflict of interest and other things, public disclosure and maintenance, and also, in the end, there will be an assessment of the gantry crane with respect to the value and other things. So these things that have been discussed about perhaps maybe donate it or return it or reduce some of the recognized depreciation. I would think that all these issues then would be the subject of during the negotiations. And so Bill 336, like I said, would just create the mechanism that would allow for the negotiation. In the end, there might be probably a direct purchase of crane from the factory, a brand new one, and that's how I see Bill 336. It does not go beyond any more than just authorizing for a direct negotiation for either the purchase or rent to own or however that they choose to do at the end. Of course, at the advice, of course, of the negotiating team and the consultants. And I rise in support of Bill 336. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Palacios. Senator Duenas, then Senator Tonietta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to rise to speak on Bill 336. Mr. Speaker, as I listen to your feelings on this issue and reflecting, I agree. It's frustrating. For over a decade now, it seems, we've been trying to solve this problem and to procure cranes. Notwithstanding the port modernization plan, it's been clear for many years that the current condition of the cranes that are down there are dilapidated at best. I'm a co-sponsor to this piece of legislation, and it did go against my better sense in terms of the option of buying new cranes, getting new cranes. It's almost like buying a new car. You got your warranty. You know what you're getting. But absent that, I have a couple of concerns, Mr. Speaker. And one of the reasons why I was able to reconcile supporting and continuing to support this piece of legislation is we now have Horizon lines leaving. We have a degree of uncertainty. Are we going to have one carrier for years to come, months? We have these 3 cranes, which were brought to Guam by Matson and Horizon, understanding that they have to unload their cargo. They need reliable equipment. And now, my fear going into this and looking at all the issues that exist, is we could even get to 24 months from now, one carrier owning all 3 of probably the most reliable pieces of equipment down there at the port now. If we follow what is supposed to happen, even in the current modernization plan, we would be looking at having to have even new crane or cranes on Guam within 24 months. That's not impossible. But here's what's at stake as described by the port. They have to get one or both of the current cranes that are in existence down there that the port has off the rails. A new crane would have to be built to the current specs of the rails that we have. Not impossible. But from what they describe, a very difficult logistical endeavor. There are provisions within this legislation, and as we have gone through now, there are increasing provisions within this legislation to make sure if this is a bad deal, then we walk away from it. But we've got a serious issue on our hands here, in all fairness. Because our backs and the port authorities groups' backs are against the wall right now. If we fail to procure a new crane, if for some reason that whole process got gummed up again, we wouldn't even be following the law to have done what we needed to do. By law, enforcing the hand of making sure that we do something about this. That's a reality. I want to close by saying in no way, as I said, it went against my better sense in terms of what to do. In no way am I defending or giving an attaboy to the shippers or any of those who clearly are protecting their interests, doing this at a cost. There's no freebie here. And yes, not being very generous when it comes to sharing and sharing alike by not allowing other vessels to utilize the equipment. That's all well stated. But this piece of legislation is not a magic bullet. It's not an end-all, but it's something to possibly get us into compliance And may I add, I'm sure these guys, and I'm not vouching for it, that's for engineers to do and people who have licenses to certify that these cranes are capable of doing what they're supposed to do. But I'm sure Matson and Horizon, and even with Horizon leaving, thought that these cranes could get them through the buildup. I'm sure they had dollar signs in their eyes. If we were at where we were supposed to be, cans should be rolling off of those cranes right now and for the next 6 years. At $125 a pop, I'm sure that'd be a nice Christmas party for several years. Notwithstanding, Mr. Speaker, I throw my hands up in the air in frustration in saying this piece of legislation right now is really all we got to try to make it right, to make an attempt at making it right. And even by the admission of those that came down, the board and others, saying, and I asked them that question, so what? What is the plan if this doesn't go forward? Well, we go through with the procurement. We do everything like we said we were going to do, but we will come up against two deadlines that are going to be tough. One is logistical removal of the scrap metal that we have on the rails right now that belongs to the port. And second is the issue of what happens if we have one shipper who owns the only cranes down there that are functional. That puts the same amount of fear in me than the ridiculousness of not being able to do the procurement upsets you, Mr. Speaker. So it is that for that reason that I come to at least a common sense assurance for me that this is but mere a vehicle. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this bill, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Dueñas. Senator Toniata, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in looking at the bill under the section of maintenance, in the event that the port acquires these gantry cranes, I was looking at the section of how this maintenance would be performed. And knowing that if the gantry cranes are procured and acquired, that they will not be able to get a PMC to manage, perform, or the operation or maintenance on these newly acquired cranes immediately. So in looking at that, I wanted to go ahead and proffer an amendment, which will be on page 7, line 2, after the word agreement, that will say, and I believe a copy has been passed out, during the interim period that the port, in procuring the PMC contract, the previous owners of the cranes shall continue to provide maintenance of the cranes on the account of the port. And this will ensure that the proper maintenance of these cranes are constant and continuous until the time that the port is able to obtain a PMC contract for these cranes, should they be acquired. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any other senator wish to be heard? Speaker Wampet? Oh, I'm sorry. On the ADA amendment.
Thank
Senator
you,
Ada.
Mr. Speaker. I certainly rise in support of the amendment. And what this really does is, as we all know, the reliability of any equipment is really dependent on how well it is maintained. And it is uncertain if the day or the week after if the procurement goes through, how long it will take for the port to be able to go out there and bid for the PMC services to maintain these cranes. In the meantime, these cranes really need to be maintained, especially more so now that we're down to one shipping liner who's got to be in and out of here within a certain window. And it is imperative that those cranes are maintained in a reliable state to be able to service this mini surge of cargo that's coming through. So this amendment certainly would be very much in the interest of being able to maintain these equipments and maintain their level of reliability. Thank you.
On the Tony Atta amendment, any others? Speaker Wampat, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, maintenance is very important, and I think that's been the problem with the government, and we don't continue to maintain whatever equipment we have. What concerns me, however, is that and maybe even something through an agreement they're going to purchase, the requirements of the purchase, of course, that you built in the language that it would, they would continue to maintain it at its current rate, rather than to say later on, okay, I've gone ahead, I'm going to sell it to you, I have the people, and I'm going to maintain it, or whatever the contract is. I mean, for all we know, how do we, what guarantee are we going to have that the cost of the maintenance, because now it's going to be on the dime of the port versus on the dime of these companies then who currently owns this crane, and that's of course my concern, because I know it will take some time, but it's just that when it's no longer coming out of your pocket, there's just always that how should I say that, I guess to be able to try to charge, at an amount greater than what normally would be if it was still in their own hands. So I'm saying this for the more of the author, so that maybe he can think about it and proffered to strengthen this amendment.
Any other senator wish to address the Tony Atta amendment on maintenance? Is there an objection to the Atta amendment as proffered? Objection. Those in favor of the Tony Atta amendment, please indicate by raising your hand. Motion carries. On the main motion, Senator Yamashita, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand in support of Bill number 336-31, and honestly, the frustration that I hear from some of the people, some of the senators in this body who have been working with this issue for years, that's the kind of frustration I feel about public education, because that's what you were paying attention to, what was needing to happen, and it just wasn't happening. And so today, here we are addressing the need for the cranes, and in the last few months, I've been going to roundtable meetings, oversights, and public hearings, and listening to the current leadership at the port. And it seems to me, while I don't know the history of what's happened 2, 4, 6, 8 years ago, I do know what has happened in the last 9 or 10 months. And it appears to me that this is, as a previous speaker has said, a way to help address some very serious issues that are in front of our island, our economy, the port, and a way of keeping things moving. Certainly the current leadership, the board of the port, has paid attention to scenarios, to opportunities, to issues, and they proffer this idea. And of course they know that it rests in our hands, in the hands of the governor, but they say that this might be a way to help make things work. And so I certainly am intrigued by the history, and I certainly hope that we're able to learn from what has happened and to ensure that current leadership pays attention to situations and addresses issues on a timely manner. And I think seriously that that's what this current leadership at the port is trying to do. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Yamashita. On the main motion, any other senator wish to be heard? Senator Pangilinan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise and join you in opposition really to this process of trying to acquire cranes and limit it to one single company, basically, one single owner. If there is such great value in this direct purchase negotiation process, then maybe that's how we should procure new cranes. Open up the direct negotiation process for the acquisition of cranes through direct negotiation so that you have people competing to provide you with the best price. There's no such incentive here to come up with the best price. How do we know? There's no standards in the bill that sets for when we should buy it. Should we buy it if the... I mean, I just don't see the objective standards for making those kind of determinations as required in the bill. They may have their own standards that they'll make the determination that if it's this and this and this, but we don't know what that is, and we leave it open-ended to just have them make that decision. And I'm very, very much against that process. The issue in the acquisition of new cranes has been because of the process. Then let's change the process. I mean, I thought we put all these brilliant private sector individuals on the port board so that they can do what's hasn't been able to be done before. And instead of now putting them in a position to use their expertise to get us the best deal, we're just saying, no, you go ahead and do whatever the hell you want. I thought these guys were going to bring that kind of expertise to do things the right way now. And what's the first thing they want to do? Change the law so I'm not confined by the law. And by the way, just do it so that I only have to deal with one guy. Well, how do we know? Why not require the port, put these guys in the mix, I don't mind, have them make an offer to sell us and directly negotiate, but have other vendors that can come in during the next 30 days and say, here's my proposal for brand new cranes or 20-year-old cranes or 10-year-old cranes. I mean, I love our modernization plan for the port because the first thing we're going to do in our modernization plan is buy 20-year-old cranes. I just don't understand it. I don't understand when we're limiting ourselves to that. That's what I don't know. It may be a good deal. It may be the best way to go. But we limit ourselves to that so that we never know. We never know what else is out there that can provide a better deal for us. So why do we want to do this? Why do we want, to me, where we think we're freeing up the hands of the port, we're tying it up. We're marrying them to this one option, 20-year-old cranes sitting on their... And I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm just saying we are limiting the options of the port to do what may be in the best interest of the port by restricting this process to one single entity, and the product they have is 20-year-old cranes. Granted, they've been refurbished. Granted, they may last another 20 years, but they're still 20-year-olds, and that's what we're starting out with. We don't even open our eyes to maybe 5-year-old cranes or brand new ones in which the other guy may be able to finance it. How do we know that we don't have somebody who will finance the cranes at $100 a can charge instead of $125? Brand new ones. But we're limiting ourselves to this, and this is the only option we have. And the only reason why we're doing this, because this body passed a law that says you got to do something by 2012 on those cranes. Why don't we allow a renegotiated lease for another 2 years so that we can look at our other options and start now? Again, it's the idea that we're going to limit the options of the port, the options of the people of Guam, to 20-year-old cranes first. And that's the only thing we're going to work with first. And we don't even set up what's the parameters for the acceptance of that. It just says you have to, have them assess it. It's a fair value. Is it a fair value? Yes. Is it a good value to fit with the port's modernization plan? We don't say it has to do that. Again, I think from my perspective, this December 2012, it's an artificial deadline that can be changed by this body. And maybe that's what we should consider, so that we open up other options for the Port Authority of Guam when we look at what should we do with the purchase of these cranes. And we have flexibility because we control the rails. Yeah, they control the cranes, but we control the rails. But if we start today and open up the options, then we will be able to be in a better position to negotiate the price of these cranes, by December 2012. Again, they're saying that, oh my God, I got to do it by 2012. That's just because this body said so, and there's that's when the 5-year lease that Matson has on the rails come up. Let's first maybe extend that a little bit. Let's negotiate now to extend that so that we allow ourselves other options and give these brilliant financial and business minds at the port to take a look at other options instead of just saying, I only want this option. This is all I want, And yeah, maybe the other board members didn't do so hot, but these guys are smart. That's what they told us. So let's give them a chance. That's what I say. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
On the main motion, any other speakers? Speaker Wampat.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I was reading the bill, of course, I have several questions, and maybe I might ask someone to answer, or I might just, kind of just think out loud or speak out loud. Is that when you go to page 2, and as I was reading this, that there are 5 cranes that we're looking at the port, and so I'm just trying to have a better understanding of this. So 3 then actually belongs to Matson and Horizon, and based on what they were saying here. And and the port has the 2 older ones. And now we're saying because of what we had passed in Public Law 30-100, there were some mandates in which then that they must purchase 2 gantry cranes no later than the end of this year. And at that time, and they had all this time to be able to do this through a procurement act, and that, however, I guess was not done. There is an option on lines 22 and 23 then for a new and refurbished crane, and my understanding is that then it was a refurbished crane that was purchased. So if public law then somehow is a problem here, in order to be able to, Public Law 30-100, to then fulfill the language of the law, that it be done through a purchase or lease to own of these 2 gantry cranes. So then now we're talking about Matson and Horizon, maybe one of them owns 2 and one owns 1. To be acquired no later than December 31st, 2012. So, and if that is a problem, then I think that this can easily be fixed by changing the date, amending the date then. If 2012, December 31st, 2012 is restrictive, then we give them the additional time then that they need to be able to then purchase and still follow the procurement law. I think, Mr. Speaker, I mean, you have oversight of governmental operations, and there's been several bills that you've proffered in terms of trying to tighten up the procurement laws, and here we're finding now that we want to totally throw that out. And that is, you know, in the language in lines 11 to 13. But if you read this, it says the Guam procurement laws prohibiting direct negotiation and acquisition or inconsistent with the succeeding authorities are hereby waived. And so my question now here is that then, is this waiver just for this one particular case? Would this waiver be for all the different activities that they need to have done through this modernization of the port? That language, I think, ought to be tighter. And you know, and of course, I can't help but bring myself back to the time when we were going to lose the ARA funds for DOE, and we talked about even fast-tracking, you know, the procurement law, keeping the procurement law, but fast-tracking it, and other states have done that, and I don't see why this legislature would not consider a fast track as well, and rather than just totally waiving the procurement laws. I heard in the some of the discussions earlier that there is a 3 years in the license, I guess, or the lease before it expires, and I'm wondering that if in that license or lease that is there a language that ultimately then that the port has the option to purchase these cranes, or is it within the language also that says that maybe since they are leasing it for that length of time, that at the end of the lease and the expiration of that lease, that then the port would ultimately own it? So that's another question that I've thrown out. On page 5, when you come to the assessment, I heard in the discussion again that prior to the initiation of negotiations, the port shall engage the services of an independent crane expert, but only to hear, and quote unquote, that the port already hired an independent contractor, a crane expert, to do this assessment. So then why is this language in there when already the person is there? Are we putting now the cart before the horse, or are we trying to cover up something already that's been done so we can make it then legitimate through this legislation? Then when you look at to provide as is, and I was going to say that we need to take a look, I mean that this individual, the expert, is going to take a look and assess it. The question is that will that be, what would that evaluation, of course, entail? And to some degree, Senator Bloss had kind of addressed that, you know, a little bit, and how much is this going to, how much is it really going to cost the port in terms of what, in their assessment, when they say that this is the state of the crane, what is it, how much is it going to cost to bring it up to standards, you know, versus, you know, a purchase of a brand new crane. Again, on the lease, that it says your commercial reasonable terms and structured capital lease versus an operating lease. And, you know, and the reason why I bring this up earlier was that if in that lease, is there that language, or maybe there isn't this language, that language there that it's to, if we are going to lease it, that we would like to now state that we want to lease it to own it, and or is there that language in that current lease that says there that we would have to buy out that entire lease, and would that be then, you know, cheaper in the long run or not? A question that I have also again is in lines 12 to 14, and I don't understand this. Is the port going to go then to PUC for review and disposition. So that means the port be requesting that now PUC approve a rate increase, or either way, up or down. That again, of course, is just not really clear to me. And then on page 6, the last sentence, the port shall not obtain such services through the use of a task order to any existing or subsequent contract, lease, or agreement. To be honest with you, I know I saw that earlier in Public Law 30-100, where it says that it would be a procurement and then not a task order. So now we're saying, so does that mean then, because we're waiving the procurement law, so now then we would use then this a task order? I look at the whole intent here, and then somehow, I don't know what it is about the government, I suppose, and it's just, it taints, of course, the government every time in a negative way, because somehow we just never really learn. We set these standards, and they just don't get enforced. There's no follow through. And we always wait until the last minute, and then when it's the last minute, then it becomes very expensive, and then we have no choice in the matter anymore. And it's just like, there's so much waste of government dollars, just like what we heard in the news about GWA and these new water meters that has cost the government so much, the ratepayers so much money, and we continue to do it. When a new person comes in, new idea, new board, new idea. I mean, gosh, when will this really ever end, and really look at the laws and try to live within the law, and that rather than constantly waffling back and forth, is that we keep changing it. So when the administration changes again, the board changes, the legislature changes, then the law changes again as well. And it's very disheartening. I feel sometimes is that maybe we need to probably seriously sit back and reconsider some of the things maybe that we do procedurally, when in the legislature, because sometimes if no one comes to testify, or else you only hear one side, then we take that side, or we take the position always because we want to protect rather than to be the person who really truly should be asking these questions and holding their feet to the fire to make sure that there is that accountability, transparency, and that the monies are being spent wisely and efficiently, because we surely are not drowning in money. If anything else, we really are hurting. So with all those questions in mind, I know I've sat here and I've tried to listen to all of the arguments, because I always value the arguments that we have, the dialogue that takes place, and I read always the committee report, even if I was not in the meeting, so that then I can have a better understanding. And what was really very evident and so true, Mr. Speaker, is that when you spoke, is that then, and this is where it's not a campaign speech or anything, but that's where it's so important, and I applaud, of course, Senator, Yamashita, who's new, and that she's made it a point to really listen, and not knowing the history, not having that institutional knowledge. But then yourself, you were here, Speaker Pangilinan also was here, and that is so important. And even the Minority Legal Counsel, who was the former chairman of the port, and there are just some things that the port did, and when they raised their surcharge, and even the legal counsel was livid about that. But then yet again, nobody even knows about it, except for a few who are here. And that's why it's so important that we have this balance, and that we share some of these things that have happened before, that we go back and look at the laws again and see, and that we just don't jump into the water without really knowing what was there before. So I will continue to listen, because I like to be able to make a decision based on the information that we're receiving, and I like to be able to hear them from both sides. So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Any other senators wish to be heard on the main motion? Seeing no hands go up, Senator Tom Abbott, you're welcome to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I want to thank my colleagues for all their input. I certainly can appreciate some of the frustrations that have been expressed and the ambivalence, I guess, about this bill. But I've looked at this closely, and I feel that in introducing this bill and standing up to defend it and support it, that it is the right decision. I would like to just address some of the questions that have been raised in closing, because the questions that have been raised are some of the questions that I've also gone through in my mind. First is the issue that many years ago, it was brought to the port's attention that there were these polar cranes that was available at the Port of Los Angeles, and we could have it for $1 each. The question, though, on the flip side of that is, did the port have $18 million to be able to refurbish those cranes and bring them to Guam and put them up? Whether they did or not, I don't know. But I'm sure we weren't going to get those polar cranes here in the conditions that it is in now for $1. The second point that I want to just address is the notion that we've paid for the cranes over and over, and that the owners have already recouped what they've invested. And, you know, to that question, I've actually posed that question to the port, and according to their calculations, according to their count of the containers that have been loaded or unloaded, Matson has probably recouped, Matson Horizon has probably recouped about $10 million of the supposed $18 million that was invested in these cranes. I would hope, and I would certainly expect, that the consultant who's doing the analysis here will in fact take a look at supporting documents to figure out what in fact was invested for these, to get these cranes to Guam, and that will be the point of departure, so that then we can start deducting what has been recouped over the past 2 years, the depreciation that has taken place, et cetera, et cetera. To the question about, is there language in the lease of these cranes? Well, actually, there's not a lease on the cranes right now. What the cranes have is a license from the port to be able to operate their cranes on the rail. And that license, they are being charged, I believe, is something in the order of about $200,000 a year. It's really it's like a toll on that rail. You want to operate your gantry on this rail, it's going to cost you $200,000 a year. That's what they're paying. And the lease is up for 5 years. And the reason why it's only up to 5 years is because the board only has the authority to enter into a lease agreement of up to 5 years. Anything longer than that would have to come down to the legislature. To the question of why was a consultant already hired? Quite frankly, even I didn't learn about that until during the public hearing on the bill. And the response from the port was that they received a federal grant to go ahead and from the Office of Economic Assistance to be able to conduct this analysis, which I believe was on the order of about $190,000, because it was information that the U.S. DA wanted in terms of what is the condition of those cranes, and are they something that we may want to even entertain. There was certainly, prior to that, I certainly wasn't. I was quite surprised that they'd already hired a consultant, and the consultant is supposed to complete his analysis of the crane by December, and then at that point, then he'll sit down and he'll brief, and then I guess the port will decide, do we have a good deal here? Is it worth going in to sit at a negotiating table? The issue about the PUC review, this of course would be an acquisition. And the law requires that when the utilities, or in this case the port that comes under the oversight of the PUC, whenever they go into a procurement that amounts to more than $1 million, the PUC has to review it to determine what the rate implications are. And of course, if this warrants an increase in the rates, then the PUC will then make that sort of determination. But if the port is in fact making sufficient revenues to be able to cover the cost of this acquisition, then presumably then there would not be a need for a rate increase. Insofar as the maintenance, or the question of that essentially Bill 336 is saying, you know, the procurement laws are being waived in this particular aspect here with regards to the procurement of the gantry cranes. And I think that's pretty clear from the fact that Bill 336, that section is amending that section of Public Law 30-57, which talks about the procurement of gantry cranes. So it really will not basically, it's not going to set aside the procurement laws for all other projects in the port modernization. In fact, those projects will have to be bidded out according to the federal acquisition regulations, because the modernization projects, the tasks of expanding the container yard, upgrading the utility infrastructure, those are really going to be overseen. Those will now come under the oversight of the Maritime Administration, and the procurement of those services will come and within according to the federal administration, federal acquisition regulations. To the question about maintenance services, no, that one, there's really no reason. I see no reason why we have to waive the procurement rules on that. I think that one, the port is going to have to go out and bid for those services. Now, on the question of are we better off keeping it with Matson, I don't think so. I think at the end of the day, the port should be the one to determine if in fact the maintenance that is being proposed to be performed, if the price is excessive or not. And there have been cases that have been found, instances that have been experienced already where Matson gave a quotation and in fact it seemed a bit high. And so I think the control of that aspect, the maintenance services, is really, we can leave that in the hands of the port. Now, I think probably the most substantive question that we need to answer is, so why are we going to go out and buy 20-year-old cranes? Why don't we go out and buy brand new ones that has the factory's warranty and all that? It really comes down to because the port cannot afford $9 million per gantry crane. And we're looking at, if all things being equal, that we can get a crane, I don't know, $3.5, $4 million, that has been thoroughly inspected, that has been certified by a crane expert, that for, you know, the $4 million, certainly not the $9 million that we don't have, is really a good buy, then I think we need to entertain that. And if that buys us the bridge for another 20 years, then fine. I think probably the next step after this is the committee is going to need to sit down with the port and say, what are you doing to start planning to buy the brand new cranes? Are you going to set up the sinking fund? And they should. But at this point, we need to start getting control of that port. We need to get those gantry cranes in the control of the port. We need to start building our equity in those gantry cranes. And through the amendment that was made by Senator Frank Blas, wherein he basically says that you know, whatever you've recouped through those surcharges, that should be deducted from the price tag of the crane. So if you started off at 18 million and you've already recouped 10, then let's start. The point of departure will be $8 million. And let's see where we go with that. So with that, Madam Speaker, I would be the first if we were in a situation where I would always support competition. But I think here's a situation where we probably should consider, in this case, that direct negotiation. And I would always be, it's always nice to have something new. In this case, I'm comfortable with these old cranes once they get certified, in particular because they have a proven track record. Even if we were to get a brand new one, we've gotten, you know, sometimes they sell lemons. At least with this one, they have a track record, and we know what kind of performance that they have given proper maintenance. Madam Speaker, I thank my colleagues, and I certainly hope that they will support the passage of Bill 336. Thank you.
On the motion to send Bill 3, I already put it away, 336, that's 31 to third reading file without any.
Madam Speaker, I'm sorry.
Yes.
If I may ask the legal counsel to make a technical amendment, when the bill was introduced, the cranes were owned by Matson and Horizon. Now with the recent announcement that Horizon is going to be leaving the scene, if we can put in their technical language that says the owners, Matson/Horizon, or their successors. So in this case, if a new company comes in next week to replace Horizon, then that new company is hired, is covered in terms of, you know, being able to sit down to discuss the matter.
Okay, so the amendment then would be to allow legal counsel then to, where it talks about the owners, Matson/Horizon, or successors.
It's successors.
On that amendment, without any objections, so ordered. And to send now 336, that's 31 to third reading file.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Without any objections, so ordered. I recognize Senator Dueñas on 373. 273.
Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to basically announce that members of the body have been able to view the map, and I believe are satisfied with the current deletion and the subsequent also inclusion of working on public works. Once again, Speaker from Barragata, we reiterated the language that he had in his bill, which is for Department of Public Works to once again review within 180 days the balance of the proposed road and its encroachments on private properties and being held. And so, Madam Speaker, I just request at this time and that 273 be placed in third reading for voting.
On the motion, without any objections, so ordered.
You just want to see?
Senator Muñoz-Barnes is out of the hall, so I'm going to go down to Bill 285. Senator Rodriguez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move to place Bill 285 on the second reading,
Third reading,
and be allowed to briefly discuss it.
You may proceed.
Thank you. Bill 285, Madam Speaker, is an act to mandate healthy foods to be sold in vending machines in all Government of Guam buildings. The purpose of this bill is to promote healthier lifestyles for government employees as well as consumers seeking services, promoted by a way of providing convenient access to healthy snack foods and drinks from vending machines situated within Government of Guam facilities. Health studies for Guam clearly show that a combined total of 61.2% of the island's adult population is either overweight or obese, and that a combined total of 40.9% middle and high school students describe themselves as overweight. We have as well a disturbingly high rate per capita for health disorders associated with obesity, such as heart disease, high cholesterol, strokes, and type 2 diabetes. These are disturbing statistics which in small part can be fought with common sense public policies promoting fitness and wellness, such as this bill regarding vending machines. Healthy living can be encouraged in many ways, and the more convenient we make it, the more likely it will be practiced. With most employees spending nearly half their waking hours on the job, work sites play an essential role in helping people make healthy lifestyle choices. This bill mandates that all machines designed to dispense food and or beverages located within all government-owned and or leased spaces or facilities, just like the ones we have here in the hall, must adhere to guidelines promoting good nutrition. Instead of only dispensing the traditional standard junk foods filled with high percentages of salt, sugar, carbohydrates, and fats, at least 50% of the vending machine products would provide an alternative selection of nutritious snack foods and beverages, thereby promoting healthier working environments. Once passed into law, 50% of all foods and beverages offered for sale in government contracted vending machines must observe the calorie count and meet the U.S. Federal Drug Administration definition of low sodium. They should also offer 100% fruit and vegetable juices or fruit-based drinks containing 100% fruit juice and no added caloric sweeteners. They would still continue to offer non-caloric beverages, including diet sodas. It makes sense to provide an alternative healthy snacking given the increasing rates of obesity and unhealthy weight gain that contributes to higher costs of health care on our island. If we can start with government-owned premises, I'm hoping that private companies will also be inspired to provide their employees a convenience, healthy choice other than salty snacks or sodas. Everyone deserves access to healthy food and beverages, Madam Speaker. And like other progressive places, we have to start promoting healthy eating to promote good health and ensure adequate nutrition, and at least among our workers. In closing, Madam Speaker, I ask my colleagues to please give this legislation their positive consideration and look at it as a way really to promote a healthier community for our island. I know we're only starting with the government buildings, but hopefully when the private sector sees the results, and it won't be for a while, of course, that they would follow suit as well. And really, this is something that if you look around the island now, Madam Speaker, in Dededo, from my village alone, it's just a place where people are really taking their health seriously. You know, we have the Dededo Sports Complex there that has the new pool. And every night you see the amount of people that come out and walk or run and really watching out for their health. And so this is our way also of contributing to that effort and ensuring that our employees, especially in the government of Guam, promote a healthier lifestyle. So thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome. On the motion, anybody would like to speak on the motion? Can we take a brief recess? The legislature is back in session. Senator Rodriguez, you want to do that when you close and have somebody else speak? Or is there anyone who would like to speak before I go back to Senator Rodriguez? None? So Senator, I see kind of half of a hand being raised. Okay, so Senator Rodriguez, maybe he can persuade you to make it a full yes. Senator Rodriguez, you're recognized.
No, I haven't. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I do have an amendment that I'd like to proffer. On page 4, on line 12, there was a section there on the amount of sodium per serving and that we didn't include. And in drafting this bill, Madam Speaker, this is something that we've worked very closely with public health in putting together. And we've mirrored the, we took parts of the FDA definition of low sodium. And so we wanted to, I think we're making copies. I don't know if it's passed out yet. But on page 4, line 12, and after fats, add and not more than 360 milligrams of sodium per serving. So that's just the part that we had left out, and we'd like to put that in there just to conform with the FDA definition of low sodium.
So the amendment then that we're looking at is what you passed out that's underscored on line 12. It should be coming, yeah, the guys are passing them out, which is to after the word fats is to put down and not more than 360 milligrams of sodium per serving. That's the amended language.
Can I ask for a
minute recess?
Minute recess,
Okay.
yes.
We'll take a minute recess. The legislature is back in session. Senator Rodriguez, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And so, just to clarify, what this amendment does is that no snack in the vending machine shall have a total content of over 360 milligrams of sodium per serving. And so the 140 milligrams per serving that is on item E of that section remains, that at least one item in the vending machine must have 140 milligram per serving.
On the amendment, no objections? So ordered.
And may I close now, Madam Speaker?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, but you said you only had half a hand.
Oh, okay. I can speak on it again.
Oh, so you want the senator to continue speaking so you'll be convinced? Or now you want to ask a question? No, maybe it might be good because then that way he'll be able to formulate his closing. So Senator Blas, you're recognized. No, that's okay. I will still make an exception for you. Remember, you said earlier that you liked me, so therefore. Okay, Senator Blas. Yeah, so you have the floor.
Oh, I thought I have the floor.
No, I'm going to let you
you're gonna
close.
begin?
Yes, I'm going to give it to Senator Blas. I do like you, Senator Rodriguez, also, so I'll let you close.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I applaud the author for the legislation, for his attempt, and for wanting to be able to promote healthier lifestyles. And I'm all for that as well. My concern, though, with regards to the whole legislation is basically what I am struggling with, and as far as my decision on what my ultimate decision is going to be is quite honestly, is the legislation necessary? What this legislation basically provides is that vending machines within public facilities must have 50% of the products that it sells has to be of nutritional value. Well, the issue, it can be clearly that, first off, should there be a vending machine? Is the vending machine in the public facilities, is it required to begin with? If it's not required, I think that it could be incumbent upon, if the director of that entity, or if it is the policy of the administration, to have vending machines that have, nutritional products. I've seen there's vending machines that exist today that all it does is dispense fruit juice and water. The vending machine in my facility, in my building, all it's got is vitamin water and what I think one diet soda and one regular soda, but for the most part it's all vitamin water. What I'm getting at is it's the choice that is being made. If you can go to the vending machine, if you don't like the product, don't get it from the vending machine. And so, I don't know. It's like, do we make this? Is this going to be a law? Is it going to be a policy? And I don't want to be put in a position where it comes down to somebody being very technical about it and says, okay, now we have to have, you're supposed to have a vending machine here, and your vending machine is supposed to have 50%. There's nothing right now in current statute that requires any public entity to have a vending machine. And if you're going to have a vending machine in your, at your offices, I think you can work with the vendor and saying, I want, this product to be sold. My concern, the other thing too is a concern with regards to going down and requiring this for the 50%. What happens if we require, with regards to the utilization of public assistance funds that we provide to individuals, that 50% of the monies that they receive from the government for their nutritional needs goes towards fruits and vegetables and those with nutritional values and settings and standards that is set by this body. While I'm for that, and I know you are too, Madam Speaker, that's where this thing can go. So, again, I'll listen to the author's closing remarks with regards to this. And again, I agree with him. Any way we can try to promote a healthier lifestyle, it's a great thing. But at the same time, there are choices that can be made. And if individuals don't want to eat it, just don't buy it from the vending machine. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, Senator. Senator Montesevio, you're recognized on the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, earlier today we talked about health heroes who promote health in the community, and I applaud them as well. And I think it's important that we try to improve the health of our community and encourage people to live healthy lifestyles. But I don't know if this is exactly what we need to be looking at doing at this point. If we're really truly concerned about obesity amongst our children, then we need to look at programs in our school and actually require most of our public schools to have physical education. I have a child that goes to Carbolito Elementary School, and for the last 2 years, she's never had a PE class. And I think that if truly we are concerned about obesity and encouraging our children to learn and understand and have healthy lifestyles, we got to start at the schools. But by forcing this down their throat, excuse the pun, no pun intended, I just don't think that this is the solution. I'm for health, I'm for improving health, but I'm not sure that this is the answer. I'm also for allowing people to make their own choices, like the retiring speaker had mentioned. You should be able to decide whether or not you want a Snickers or a granola bar, a Diet Coke or a Coke. I think that by going down this road, we might be looking at the possibility of soon requiring people or regulating what they serve at McDonald's, and I just don't think that that's what we need in this community. So I just like my colleagues to consider that when taking a vote on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Montesevio. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? Okay. I'm going to ask then the author if he would like to close.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the two retiring speakers. And our good colleague, the retiring speaker, just brought to my attention a fact that our public schools right now are the vending machines that are accessible to students need to be 100%. The snacks in there, the beverages need to be 100% healthy. And so with that, before I close, I would like to proffer an amendment that I'm afraid if this passes would dilute that. And so I would like to add, I don't know what section, I'll leave it, a new section, to add that vending machines in the jurisdiction of the Department of the Guam Department of Education shall remain, or if we can just add that this, this act shall not apply to vending machines under the jurisdiction of the Guam Department of Education. Shall not, because with the, they're 100%. And so if we pass this, then we're lowering that. Yeah. And so it's a board policy now that that vending machines in the public schools that are accessible to students must be 100%.
So the amendment will be, this act shall not apply in the jurisdiction of GDOE.
That's right.
Okay. Yes, Senator Ada.
The reason why I guess it's not, the speaker was saying that the reason why it's not going to be applicable to the Department of Education is because they already have a policy in place
Of 100%.
That's right, that does even better. So
Yes.
it would seem then that that really we need that qualifier in there, so that if for some reason tomorrow the Board of Education decides to change that, then that kind of moots this exemption. That's the only reason why we're exempting it. It's because they have a higher standard now. But if that standard is lowered, then
But they wouldn't be able to change the policy because it'll be will conflict with the federal breakfast and lunch program. So you cannot, yeah, that's part of the reason they went this way, this route.
And Madam Speaker, we could also.
So Senator Ada, is you
Sorry.
still okay?
all right.
Thank you.
So we can amend it, and we can ask the legal counsel to assist me in this. Is just put language in there that if a department or agency has a stricter policy, then that should stand, and this act shall not, shall not reduce that policy.
Okay. So for legal counsel, the original amendment was to say that this act shall not apply in the jurisdiction of DOE to ensure then that the DOE does not reduce its 100% requirement of healthy snacks and drinks to be, reduced because of this legislation. Yes, got it. So on that amendment, without any objections, so ordered. So Senator, you still want to continue to speak and then close? And
Yes.
close? Okay.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for that opportunity. And I'd just like to ask again my colleagues, Madam Speaker, to please take a look at this as and it's not about, taking away your choice of what kind of food or snacks or drinks to buy. The fact of the matter is, sometimes in these departments or agencies where vending machines are, that's the only machine where you can get a drink or a snack. You don't have the luxury of just, getting in your car or walking down the street and going to a convenience store. And so when that opportunity is there, we should take it. We should take that opportunity to start slow. That's why we're not asking 100%. We're asking 50% of the contents of that vending machine offer healthy snacks and food. If you take a look at the amount of money we spend on healthcare costs, Madam Speaker, this weekend I'm going to attend a diabetes conference, and it's something that we should have been doing already. And so, I know that we don't require government buildings to have a vending machine, and sure, it should have been a policy. The directors or the administrators of the departments should have a policy, but the fact is that's not happening today. And unfortunately, this is something that I feel, and I'm asking my colleagues to consider as well, is making sure we enact this into law so that we can start somewhere. And this is starting in that place. Earlier today, the Department of Public Health has presented their non-communicable disease strategic plan for Guam, and includes initiatives such as these. What they're calling for is across the board, around the island, all vending machines to be 100%, selling healthy foods and drinks. And so, I think by taking this small step, is really, expressing our good faith, even with these companies that provide these vending machines. That look, we're not gonna. I'm going to use the term, shove it down your throat, but we're going to make you, come into compliance slowly, because we know it's going to take some resources on their part to also transform the way, they're doing business today. So again, Madam Speaker, I thank the co-sponsor, Senator Ada, and I ask all my other colleagues here to please support and vote for this bill. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, Senator. So on the motion then to send Bill 285-31 to third reading file without any objections, so ordered. Recognize Senator Palacios and amended Bill 286-31.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move that Bill 286 as amended by the Committee on Public Safety, Law Enforcement, and Judiciary be placed on third reading file for purpose of discussion, and if I may give an
proceed.
overview. Madam Speaker, Bill 286 proposes to increase the autonomy of the Attorney General in the handling of financial and personnel matters that affect the office. On a routine basis, Madam Speaker, the Office of the Attorney General would experience difficulties specifically concerning personnel recruitment of either new staff or replacement staff, and sometimes in the timely release of allotment or even in the amount of allotment release. This difficulty, of course, diminishes the ability of the Office of the Attorney General to effectively and efficiently execute its responsibilities as the government of Guam's chief legal representative. The Public Defender Service Corporation, Madam Speaker, currently administers its budgetary resources and matters pertaining to personnel. This level of autonomy allows for the public defender to efficiently manage its financial resources and to recruit in a timely manner and retain personnel critical to supporting the mandates of the public defender. The same level of autonomy, Madam Speaker, has not been granted to the Office of the Attorney General, despite the fact that the AG has a staff that is larger than the Public Defender Service Corporation, which is its counterpart. The dependency of the Attorney General's office on the Governor's Office / BBMR's decision on when and how much allotment to release for the operation of the office places the AG, Madam Speaker, in almost a compromising position in that they are almost forced to maintain good working relationship with BBMR, DOA, and the Governor's Office. There's nothing wrong with maintaining good working relationship, but it has to be mutual. Now, this condition, Madam Speaker, may interfere in the proper discharge of the duties of the AG, exerts undue influence upon the office, and it might force the office in some way to engage in some kind of a relationship such as, you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. And that's usually, it sometimes might lead to that. And of course, this kind of relationship, Madam Speaker, is never good, especially when it pertains to the Office of the Attorney General. Now, Bill 286, Madam Speaker, proposed to break this compromising relationship between the AG and the Governor's Office, the BBM, of course, DOA, by proposing to increase the autonomy of the elected office of the AG in the managing of its financial and personnel matters to be near the same level, at least, as its counterpart, which is the Public Defender Service Corporation. Now, here are some of the difficulties that the AG office faces almost routinely. Untimely and inadequate release of the quarterly allotment of the AG's office for the operation. The time it takes between 4 to 8 months to procure services or product, and the time it takes to hire a replacement staff. Now, contributing, of course, to the lengthy process is the fact that the AG is one of many other agencies whose requests for BBMO and DOA approval for recruitment or for procurement are channeled through BBMR's office at the Governor's Office. So the AG is just one of many other agencies whose needs are taken care of. Bill 286 proposes to shorten the processing time for procurement and for recruitment by authorizing the AG to process its procurement directly with the vendor, of course within the procurement laws, and by authorizing the AG to process its recruitment directly with DOA. Bill 286 does not remove DOA's processing of applicants for eligibility and for qualifications and placing in the eligibility list. It does not remove the employee of the AG from the protection of the Civil Service Commission. It does not authorize, of course, the AG to set its own compensation package. All this will remain with DOA. Specifically, Madam Speaker, Bill 286 proposes to add to what is now 7 current duties under Section 3109. And essentially, the current duties established, which are the 7 duties, are prosecutorial in nature. For example, the prosecution of offenses, and there is the conducting of the grand jury, conduct on behalf of the government of Guam, civil actions, represent government agencies and departments, be diligent in protecting the rights and properties of the government of Guam, institute action. These are current duties. Now, the bill proposes to add 4, which I call administrative functions, beginning on page 4, and that is prepare and submit annual budget for approval by the legislature, administer federal funds and programs on behalf of the Office of the Attorney General, serve as the Office of the Attorney General's appointing authority for expenditure of funds, serve as the Office of the Attorney General's appointing authority, which is the AG, for all personnel employed at the Office of the Attorney General, hiring employees from an established list of qualified applicants in accordance with established criteria, and assigning, detailing, and transferring employees as the Attorney General deems necessary for the effective operations of the office. Currently, this practice, policy rather, is in place at the Public Defender Service Corporation. Now, under the budgetary, of course, the budgetary and financial matters, this bill proposes to make an amendment and allow the AG, beginning on page 5, the Office of the Elected Attorney General shall receive from the Department of Administration an amount no less than 1/12 of its budget on the first day of each month of the fiscal year until such budget has been exhausted. And of course, in a month where there are 2 paydays occurring, then the Department of Administration shall release such funds required for the purpose of meeting the operational needs of the office. This is the same language that now I guess is provided to the judiciary. I remember this very well in the current budget. And so this is the kind of autonomy that the AG seeks to achieve with this budget, with this bill. On the fiscal authority and the accounting expenditures, of course, the Office of the Attorney General shall be responsible for the conduct of operational matters addressing its financial activities in accordance with and consistent, of course, with the provision contained herein. The Department of Administration shall establish, of course, for the benefit of the Attorney General, a fund to be known as the Office of the Attorney General's Operation Funds. There were several meetings, about 3 meetings between the DOA and the AG at my office, and they are essentially doing this now, except that with this proposal, they would then now have a new name for that funds, but they already have an account that actually they are drawing from to fund, or rather, to fund the Attorney General's office. So this is just a little change, just so that the new funds now would begin to, I guess, will still be administered through DOA. All monies, excepting monies required by law to be deposited in the special funds received by the office from whatever source should be deposited into this. And these are the financial matters that they would like to have some degree of authority in the managing of it, so that they can have this autonomy of deciding when to spend and what to spend it for, and achieve what they what they want to do in support of their functions. For the administration of personnel, again, the Attorney General shall be responsible for the conduct of operational matters addressing its personal activities, in accordance, of course, with established regulation. For this, Madam Speaker, there will be a transition period of about 6 months, 180 days, during which time the Attorney General will work very closely with DOA in the setting up of the account, in the processing in the transitioning into the full implementation after 180 days. Madam Speaker, there's nowhere here that gives the Attorney General any greater power than right now they enjoy, but through layers of steps going through the process. And Bill 84 just proposes to remove some of this process and allow for the expeditious handling of these personnel and financial matters. You have heard it when they testify about recruitment, and a lot of times the legislature will appropriate money for the funding to fill the vacancies, and then the budget year will expire. There will be lapse because the position has not been filled through some delays. These are the things that they want to address, with this new bill. I would like to offer an amendment, though, and I pass it out, Madam Speaker. And by the way, before I go to that amendment,
just to add on, I pass on to you a communication as of yesterday between the AG and DOA with respect to the return of 4 GG1s. And supposedly the reason given by DOA on this is that these positions are affected by the hiring freeze. I checked the current statute, the current provision in the current budget, and the hiring freeze, Madam Speaker, affect only hiring of new employees or filling the new positions. It actually exempted filling positions that are vacated through retirement or resignation. And from the response of the Attorney General on the 4 positions, these are positions that were vacated either through resignation or through retirement, and they wanted to fill this: accounting technician, supervisor, word processing secretary, legal secretary, and investigator. So this is just an example, of the back and forth delays. Perhaps there's an issue there, but if there's an issue, and if it can be handled by the AG directly, they would have known what to do at that point, or they would have known whether they can fill the position or not. I'd like to offer an amendment before I leave the podium, Madam Speaker, and I pass it out. And that is to amend on page 4, or rather on page 7, section 4, and beginning, of course, on line 26, right to the next page, up to line 9 on page 8, and essentially just strike off some of the words, and it will read like this, the amendment: notwithstanding any other provisional law, the Office of the Attorney General may provide 1 airway fare for newly hired, classified, unclassified, or limited term appointment attorneys to Guam, and may seek reimbursement from the attorneys who do not serve the full term of their contract with the Office of the Attorney General. And according to the AG, the current statute in the Personnel Code of Title IV, Guam Code Annotated, only permits travel for employees whose contract are for 2 years or more. And most of their TLA is actually for 1 year. And sometimes they will pay for the one-way ticket, but they cannot seek reimbursement if the person should leave before the 1 year is out. And so this would take care that no matter if it's 1 year or if it's for 2 years, that they will pay for the one way, but if the person leaves prematurely, the Office of the Attorney General would have a right to seek recovery of the one-way airfare. And that is the amendment that I like to propose. With that, Madam Speaker, thank you very much.
On the amendment, and everyone should have a copy. Does anyone who would like to speak on the amendment? Hearing no objections, so ordered. On the motion, does anyone like to speak on the motion, the main motion? There being none, so on the motion then to send Bill 286-31 to the third reading file without any objections, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
We're going to move back to Senator Munya Barnes is here, so I recognize her on 281-31.
Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move that Bill 281-31 COR be moved to the third reading. Can I talk about it, please?
Yes,
briefly?
you may proceed.
Madam Speaker, 281-31 is an act to add a new subsection to D to Section 9303 of Article 3, Chapter 9, Title 5 of the Guam Code Annotated. And Madam Speaker, this is relative to the transmittal to the compiler of laws, the adoption, repeal, rescission, or amendment of the rules and regulations. Both I and members of my staff, Madam Speaker, have fielded numerous phone calls from individuals seeking information on the statuses of rules and regulations that have been filed with my office as the legislative secretary. And while I can say that while my office maintains a timeline of every submission transmitted under the Administrative Adjudication Act, which we all know as the AAA, an unavoidable gap remains in the process. And under the current structure, there is no mandate to inform the affected agencies, departments, or instrumentalities of the status of their AAA submissions. The issue of what happens to these documents, Madam Speaker, after filing has been raised by our majority counsel with good reason. And although these documents had been filed and tracked, our current process falls short of the completion. This bill, as written by me, clarifies existing law and ensures that the AAA process results in a defined outcome. I'm not saying because she has shared with me that, as admitted to me, I mean, by when I note legal counsel, it was that there wasn't an identified process of how we do things. So based on that and based on what we have talked about, you and I, Madam Speaker, in reference to just trying to identify a process of how things get tracked, we don't have, and I can say that we as a body don't have that mechanism to show where the documents go through after it's processed. And of course, as the rules, the standing rules of this August body says, there's timelines, and statute shows that there's timelines on certain days when documents are filed. After it gets filed with the clerk's office, or it goes through the tracking system, and of course we work closely with the Committee on Rules. After that timeline is up, it just is there. And in the past, we have had some AAA regulations and fees that have come this way, and when time has lapsed, there's no official reporting to where it goes. And here, Madam Speaker, I'm just trying to identify or delineate a better, accountability and transparency when those kind of documents are transmitted to this August body. And I don't think, I hope my colleagues will support me in the effort, is so that when these documents come to this August body and we clearly receive them from the agencies, and as they work the process through their departments and agencies, and that timeline has to come through here, and that timeline is exceeded from here, is this bill will give it a clearer process that we must be able to share with that agency, with the compiler of laws, to make sure that they know that that timeline was up, or that a bill was introduced and it was heard. So I ask my body to, my August body, my colleagues, to help me support this endeavor. Thank you.
On the motion, can we take a brief recess? Munya Barnes, you still have the floor.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much again. Madam Speaker, after speaking with council and yourself and some others and other colleagues here, I just want to ask that if we can just move to set aside the bill on 281, and so I can seek further legal clarification, and we can probably come back to that on Monday, if I may.
Yes, so on that motion then, without any objections, so ordered. Thank you, Senator.
And Madam Speaker, if I may,
You are,
282?
yes.
If I can move 282 to the third reading, 282 CR on the third reading?
And you want to speak on it?
Yes, if I can.
Yes, please, proceed.
As you know, Madam Speaker, 282 is an act to amend Section 51502 of Chapter 51 of Division 2 of Title 10 Guam Code Annotated, and this is relative to exempting the Guam Recycling Fund from the Transfer Authority of Imagalahin, Guahan. And as you know, Madam Speaker, this fund was created to address a specific need in our community. The Recycling Revolving Fund was created by law to assist and encourage recycling of material waste in our island. I like to say that when we do not address the need for recycling in our villages, we fail our community. And if the governor continues to take out of this fund and not pay it back, then he will not be keeping his promise and commitment to our community. Yes, Madam Speaker, I want to share with you that with this legislation, the governor will lose access to a fund that he has used to work and manage the government of Guam's existing cash flow problems. But we are told, we have told our tax-paying residents that each time that you process through the vehicle registration system, a portion of your registration fee will be used for that municipal recycling projects, and that project is the abandoned vehicle program. And Madam Speaker, everyone who goes into the line revenue tax and pays their vehicle registration, portions of that, Madam Speaker, go into the Department of Revenue and Taxation, portions of that go to the Streetlight Funds, but portions of that go into the program like the Abandoned Vehicle Program that had been working very, very good with the mayors around the island. And under the Governor's Transfer Authority, Madam Speaker, $5.5 million of that fund was transferred out of the Recycling Revolving Fund and not used. Now, I'm not saying 1 million, I'm not saying 2 million or 3 million, I'm saying 5.5 million was taken out and it wasn't used for its intended purpose on what we committed to our residents here on Guam. And every time, Madam Speaker, we move forward in our efforts to implement a sustainable recycling program, something has gotten in the way. The mayors are now looking to us, again, the legislature, for guidance and protection of this fund. And this is our chance to provide that needed protection. Madam Speaker, you and I have been working closely with our village mayors in order to clean the metallic debris and the white goods within their villages. And, you know, we had the program going. And we're at a standstill again. And because we had found out that because our government was so cash-strapped that they had to utilize the fund. And where do we go? You take from Peter to pay Paul, but who are we kidding? We're taking from a program that worked very well. We take from a program that we told our people here on Guam, this is what we will use the portions of your vehicle registration for, and now, again, we're not using it. So, Madam Speaker, in the gist of working closely with the mayors and the residents within the villages to clean up our island, tourism is our #1 economic driver. And in order for us to have people come back over and over again, we must be able to showcase the beauty of what we have, and we have to be able to clean it maintain it and keep it beautiful so tourists can come and come and come and come over and over and over. And if we don't have the resources to help our mayors, help our residents clean up our villages, then we would have failed our community. So I ask my colleagues to please help me. I know this is going to be hard, but please take a stand and saying, you know what, I want to make a difference. And I know that when we were talking about this, we talked about you being number 2, Madam Speaker, and my brother Frank to be number 3 on this bill. So if there's no objection.
There being no objection, so ordered.
That would be Frank Blas, my brother.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senators. On the motion? On the motion then to send 282-31. Oh, Speaker Pangilinan on the motion.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I understand that, somebody may have some concerns about this, but, this amendment really makes a lot of sense given the governor's recent directive that he's going to reserve 15% from every department and agency, which means that he'll never run out of money if he reserves 15% and he won't need to transfer any. So what this does is preserve the program funds and keeps it separate from operational funds. And I think that in order to ensure that we continue to dedicate the revenues that we collect with the original to be in concert with the original intention for what the use of those funds are, then I think that this would achieve that objective. And it is important that we continue to use the funds generated by this for the purpose that they were intended, and keeping it out of the governor's hands with regards to transfer and diverting it to use it for other uses that was not the original intent of the legislation would be a good thing. And it would not, given the governor's current position that he's able to cut 15% from each of the departments and agencies, and those monies are in fact still within those departments and agencies, then he won't need the money from this to support those operations, because he already has now 18% in reserve, the 15% that he decided to cut, plus the 3% reduction in the overall appropriation level in the reserve fund for deficit reduction. So if in fact the governor is correct in his revenue projections, in his reservation of the 15% out of the operating budgets of the departments and agencies, and with the 3% reserve for deficit reduction, then there is no need for transfer authority, and I support this. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Senator Pangilinan. On the motion then to send Bill 282 to the third reading without any objections, and so ordered. Okay. Well, I guess I'm going to have to hold on Senator Rodriguez's. This thick, so we have to wait till Monday. Okay. I'm trying to find the ones that so we can finish. How long is 344? Yeah. Okay. So let's just do the one to pull out bill number. Senator Pangilinan, Senator Frank Blas, you're recognized then on a motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Outstanding House, I'd like to move that we go back to motions, please.
On that, no objections, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'd like to move that we Bill 236 that was down in third reading, we can pull it back up to second reading.
On that motion, without any objections, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in Bill 236, colleagues, you have the amendment that's before you for Bill 236, and very quickly, the amendment that's being proffered is going to be found on page 8, line 14 of the bill. And what the amendment will do is strike out the subsection 2 that is contained there, and replace that with a new subsection that shall read, the physician shall agree to work a minimum of 20 hours a month pro bono while in the program at a Department of Public Health and Social Services clinic to service those patients that do not have the ability to pay and patients under the medically indigent program.
On the motion, no objections, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. With that, Madam Speaker, I move to place Bill 236 as amended and substituted back to third reading.
On that motion, without any objections, so ordered.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and then
Okay.
to move on back to the.
Thank you. So we're back then on the agenda. So we do have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bills. We're going to recess this evening because there is a function is happening, a vigil, candlelight vigil at 6 o'clock. And we would resume then session at 9 a.m. Monday morning to 12 noon, to then allow for legal counsel and the clerks to engross the bills for voting on Tuesday at 4 p.m. The legislature is in recess.